Hey guys, welcome to the eighth Q&A. And so today we just have three questions. So the first one is from Mpande. The death fear, I guess. Do you still have those random fears of death? Question randomly what actually happens, short moments of appreciation of those around you. What if at death it's just a state of pure existence, non-existence, to say the same way before birth? We're freaking out, wondering why we don't have bodies or what's about to come once born into a body. It's literally just you existing. To say that could be the same when you die, you just return back to a state of just existing. You won't even know that you're alive or dead because you're just there. Like how you don't remember falling asleep or waking up. But none of that matters in the end. We're here now. A million concepts, dogmas, texts exist, but what we feel and experience internally is what truly affects us at the end of the day, even what you know and believe. It's cool, just enjoy your experience, read all you want to read, meditate, try experiencing the void, etc. Do all that you do, but always take note of how you feel truly within and ask yourself at any point, how do I feel right now within myself? Yeah, I like that, like especially the beginning. So that I'm gonna just talk a little bit about that. So he says, do you still have those random fears of death? And he also says short moments of appreciation of those around you. So just to clarify, um, basically, the more that you're releasing emotional pain, mostly crying, and sometimes there's a lot of anger. You have to release a huge amount, but eventually that's what's kind of dissolving this illusion that is the ego and the mind. And the ego, remember, creates images of yourself in your own mind, but also images of the people in your life. And so to make that very clear, if you have, let's say, your mom or your dad, so you know what they look like. If you close your eyes, immediately you remember what they look like. But imagine that instead of looking at them like physically, like you're in the same room with them, if you close your eyes, you have an image of them in your mind. So that's what I mean by the ego creates these images. But it's not only just a literal image, like I said, closing your eyes and seeing them, but it has layers and layers of who they are. So the first layer, if it's your mother, is literally the idea, the belief that this is my mother, which means she should be the perfect human being. She should always love me. She should always be patient. So these are the layer. I mean, there's many, many more layers. And so how this is related to the question is, so he says those random moments of fear and then short moments of appreciation of those around you. So what he's basically saying is eventually you have these moments where either you feel like you're going to die for real. So this is not a spiritual feeling or anything. For some reason, maybe you have your heart rate increases and you think, "Oh my God, my time has literally come. I'm going to die right now." So if that happens in the mind, or somebody in your life you think is about to die. So if somebody, if you live with someone and they're going to work and now they've left, you might think in your mind, there might be a very strong feeling too that says, "Oh my God, I think this is my intuition saying that they're going to die right now. A car is going to run them over, something is going to happen." So when you have either of those thoughts, death, this, yeah, the theme of death in your mind related to yourself or other people, this is the image of either you or that person dying in your mind. And you can see sometimes you can be right in front of them or they're in the house. They're perfectly healthy and alive. And you could have these really deep tears, like immense grief, like they've died already. So this is all kind of related to the same thing. Um, do you have something, Joe?
Um, yeah, so for the random moments where death sort of occupies you, uh, in line with what you're saying, Steve, that you can kind of explore those more and more as well. I mean, they come up randomly, but I think at some point they will become like a central focus as well. And there's a lot to cry about and um release around death. I think we spoke about it quite a lot in the recent live as well about death as a concept because it's only a concept because as Steve said it's the ego dealing with parts of itself, images that it's made up of that part of your ego and others in your life and the concept itself because we're only ever dealing with the death of the ego and not actually the death of the physical body, which the ego mistakes as being belonging to it, part of it. Um, so I guess it's more just like a general comment on the random sort of thoughts and feelings around death is that if it's coming up, it might be good to continue to prod, and then more and more will come up. Be very uncomfortable, um, but there'll be a lot to release there as well. And just the signing off point about checking in and seeing how do I feel right now with myself is a great practice. And the more you can cultivate that, the more you'll be able to access these things. Um, I think it might seem random at first. It's like, oh, I have this like bit of space where I'm able to check in with my body, but um, I think we say it quite a lot is that it's kind of like a trained muscle, and the more that you do that, the more you'll be able to see what's going on. Um, and that's just part of the practice of all of this. You start to spot more and more subtle things that's going on with your body and with your thoughts and everything, the more you're able to do that. Um, yeah, those are my two thoughts.
Yeah, and I wanted to share this image that I just had that really shows how much we live in the mind. And so I think because it's hard to tell, it's like, what does that mean? We live in the mind. And so I think the perfect example using this situation. So when you're on a spiritual journey and you're releasing so much emotion, you might also actually be healing certain relationships, like I said, with mother or father. And so if a really big healing is happening, like you've had an issue your entire life with your mother, and then let's say that she's finally like not in denial anymore of what she did. And so there's really good conversation. That's like extremely healing. And so that image, right, that that person has of their mother, like she did this to me, that image begins to crumble. When there is a deep conversation, then there's crying about it. There's a release like, oh my God, she finally admitted it. And I feel seen and all this stuff. And so imagine that all of that happen, whether it's a woman or a man. And let's say suddenly you start having these thoughts in this grief, which is my mom is dying, and yet she's perfectly fine. So how this is, so the image is, think about if you're in the same house as your mom, you're both there in the house, and then you saw her 10 seconds ago, and so she's just in the kitchen cooking, and nothing bad is happening. It's just silence. And then you start having these thoughts, oh my God, like my mom, what if she died? How would I feel? And then you start sobbing. So think about that situation, and then you'll be able to see how the ego is madness and how we're trapped in the mind. If your eyes look at your mom and she's 100% fine and healthy, and she's just standing in the kitchen and nothing is happening, how can you have the experience like that she's actually dying? So, if that's possible, it shows you that the mind is so strong that it almost, what's the word? It not hijacks, but it what your physical eyes, the information that your physical eyes are giving you are the most objective. They're the most accurate, which is my mom is in the kitchen right now, alive and healthy. So that should be enough in a healthy mind, and then there would be nothing. But instead, your eyes have given you the evidence that she's fine, and your mind is going crazy, and you're having all these emotions. Oh my God, I think she's gonna die, and I'm sobbing, and I'm not gonna, it's too much pain, but nothing is happening in the physical world. And so I think this is a good example to show you this is what it means to live in the mind. Now, it's not that it's bad, this is a part of the process. It's like the entire ego that is inside the mind is unraveling, right? So this is why psychosis is madness. I mean, the entire ego is madness because we've created an entire fictional world, imagery in the mind when we have the five senses to see, actual reality. And so I think that was a good example to show that it's funny. We live in the mind, but it's hard to see.
Yeah, and I was going to address the sort of what if middle part as well about pure existence, non-existence, what we were before birth, which may be the same as after death, which is because death is such a overwhelming topic for our egos to deal with. Um, it will always try and come up with ways to soothe ourselves, and trying any attempt at what ifs before, after, and what's going on, like what is any of this, what's happening after my body dies, is an egoic attempt to soothe itself, to not confront the realities, not the realities, but the pain that lies with inquiring about death, as in the pain of death. So we can never know anything about any of this whatsoever, and any kind of sort of cerebral musings about any of that um, will be the ego in one way or another trying to soothe itself and distract itself away from confronting the extremely painful emotions that are attached to death. Um, and you can notice, the ego doing this, like when death comes up, it'll start postulating about ways that it's okay, that it's you know, it's a more subtle form of just thinking that we're going to be reincarnated, which is another question that we'll deal with. Um, but yeah, it's something to look out for, perhaps, because whenever the sort of mind goes there, it's an indication that it's sort of leading you away from looking at what's painful.
Yeah. I'm just reading here. Yeah, the same part. So, what if a death? So, it's what you just said, but it's funny because that thought, what if? So, think about it. The topic is something that is not happening right now, which is death, right? So, it's like it's the end of your life. So, if it's not here, this is the classic thing that the ego does. It's not here right now. But then the mind says, oh no, but this is very important to think about. But it's not important because it's not here and right now. So it's not real, right? But also, the other thing I was going to say is to give the example of animals, right? Because animals, you could say they can't not be in the now, right? As just an example. They're just there, like a squirrel looking for whatever they're looking for. Of course, I'm going to have to describe it in words, but they're not, this is not happening in their mind. They're just, looking. But it's almost like their entire existence, if they're just looking, right? So they're just looking, it's just now, 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 now. They're just consumed in what's right in front of them. And so from birth, you could say to death, the moment that they die, even the last second is just now, now, now. They're never like, what if 5 minutes from now? That's what humans do, right? And so I think the context of a squirrel not being able to do that makes it clear that even though it's sometimes fun to like think about these things, it's kind of philosophy. It's not something real. It is actually a form of insanity if you think about it, because it's like, but what does that have to do with being right here, right now? And then the mind, the ego would say, but this is not interesting, right? It's thinking about God, the nature of reality. This is much more worthwhile. And this is exactly what the ego does. Because the senses, the five senses are numbed, that's the ego's response. It's like, what do you mean? I'm just going to look at this, this living room? That's nothing. That's boring. That's not special. Let me think of something special. And so it has to create like this imaginary thing in your mind that seems to be more interesting than what's happening right here, right now. And that's pretty much the illusion that it creates. It's not real. Okay, so there was something else I think towards the bottom. Um, Damn, I forgot it. I wonder if there was anything else about there must be something about death that I forgot. No, I can't remember. It's interesting because then the next question, which is about karma, actually kind of goes into the same theme, sort of, because death and karma and reincarnation, they're all kind of together. Do you have anything else, or I guess I could just go to the next one?
Yeah, no, we can go to the next one, I think.
Okay. So the second question is from Elena. What karma actually means? This might seem at first glance like a more personal question, but it's actually a curiosity. Do you believe in karma? Do you believe that on a very deep level there is a consciousness that makes sure everything eventually comes to the surface? I mean, more specifically, what happens along the spiritual path? Because I've noticed that it brings up things that were done to me, which I wasn't aware of at the time. And I wonder if maybe the same thing will eventually happen to those who hurt me and weren't conscious of it back then. Do you think that this is, in fact, what karma is, the awakening of consciousness that brings unpleasant things to light, both for those who have done wrong and for those who have been victims? Anyway, I personally believe that even victims have, in some way, been aggressors too, even if unintentionally, in the sense that we all make mistakes. But what I wanted to ask more precisely is how you see karma or whether you think it exists at all. So I guess there's a few things to answer. Um, so do you believe on a very deep level that there's a consciousness? So it's like sort of like saying God or that makes sure everything eventually comes to the surface. Um, Okay, so the first one, do you believe in karma? So karma is a very loaded word, just like enlightenment and spirituality. And the first thing that comes to mind is when somebody says, like, that's your karma coming to get you, basically. It's like, oh, you did this to this person. Well, now it's time to pay. And the paying, the whatever, the punishment is your karma. And of course, there's also, good karma. You do something good and something good happens to you. So that doesn't exist because that's just another fantasy of the ego. And notice the duality, right? Good karma, bad karma. Um, but the way that I would define karma has nothing to do with that, but it would just be first of all, it has nothing to do with past lives, even though that's the other element of that you did something in another life, and therefore that's why now your life is difficult and this goes wrong. But I would say that karma is basically the collection of pain or unconsciousness that is sitting in the psyche. And each person has kind of slightly unique pain and trauma because there's, different parents. And so I think everything that is in the psyche, so it's the subconscious, that is there, that is basically ruining your life. It's the fears that keep us from doing what we want, and sometimes we feel depressed and we feel all these things. All of that in the mind is, you could say, is karma, is your karma. But it's not like somebody gave it to you. It's just, you were born to that family, those things happen to you. So let's say that's karma in the mind. But also you could say that because it's there in the context of spiritual awakening, you could then say that it also is your karma since it's there. Everything that you will have to feel so that it one day doesn't exist in the mind is also part of that karma, right? Because the only way that that stuff is going to disappear and stop ruining your life is if you just feel it all the way through. Um, yeah. Do you have something, Joe?
Yeah, I was just gonna add that whenever we tackle like a spiritual concept like karma, past lives, and all these things, you might think like, well, how do you know? Like, what? How do you know it? Like, like where have you gone and found out this? It's really because and it's always for you to figure out or find out firsthand. But it's about asking the question of how do these concepts serve the ego? And then you can link it. There's always a clear reason why these things come into the mind, and they're very appealing to serve the ego's purpose. It's not like we've jumped into another dimension, seen the truth, and come back with it to tell everyone about it. It's always about knowing the ego, knowing your own ego, how it operates, and why it would find an idea like this appealing and the function that it serves to keep you suppressed. So it's known from a very practical point, not from like a metaphysical point. There's no like metaphysical knowledge that I know better than you, that there's no life after death. It's just asking the question, what would believing something like this do to serve the ego's purpose of keeping you not looking at your pain? And you will always be able to link the two. So just wanted to add that as like a base thing for like any otherworldly spiritual ideas, concepts, powers, these sorts of things. Um, so the other thing I was gonna say is about consequence. So there is like a, you could say there's like a practical karma, but um it's not in line with like this past life karma. That, you do an action or a behavior, and there will be consequences to the action and behavior. Um, but that's a lot. That's sort of dressed down and not otherworldly in any way. But there is a clear relationship between the sort of severity of your action and the severity of the consequence. And I think it was Artem that said it very clearly that your karma, in the way that I'm speaking about it, in terms of like consequence for your action, um, is always to do with your passions. So the thing that you act upon because of your repressed emotions, and these will be things like addiction, all of the behaviors and actions that are taken in this way will affect your life in the biggest way, and you'll see this cause and effect the most strongly with those things. So that's like a very practical way of thinking about um, karma as it actually expresses itself. Um, and another word to look out for is belief. So any belief, and this is a good sort of practice to sort of start pulling at this thread of inquiry. Any belief that you hold serves your ego. Beliefs are not needed in reality because you're just dealing with reality, and why would you have to believe anything about anything? You're just dealing with hard reality. So if there is a belief, it serves your ego in some way, and it isn't true because it has nothing to do with reality. And the further you go down that hole, the more freaky it will get because you realize what constitutes a belief. We've spoken about sort of separation, I think, a bit in the last live about the ego, where like naming even the act of naming something is a separation, and then beliefs sort of come out of this. Um, Maybe that's a bit too much of a tangent, but whenever you start to inquire about beliefs, identify what belief you might have, and then you can think about how it's serving your ego's sole purpose of surviving and keeping you repressed. Um,
Maybe I just want to give an example that I think I gave a long time ago, which is just to understand what belief is. Belief versus, let's just use the word knowing.
mhm,
Belief is something, so let's say that, okay, so I'll just explain it. So the example that I gave once is that there's somebody eating an ice cream right in front of you, right? And so they don't have to believe in the taste. So I really want like to make this very clear. So that to use the language like very accurately. So if I'm putting it in my mouth, it's on my tongue, which is one of the five senses. I can taste whatever it tastes like, right? So I cannot say I believe it tastes like this. I know for certain. I don't need to believe, right? But what if I'm having the ice cream and you're just watching me have the ice cream? And let's say somehow you've never had ice cream in your life. You've never had any of the ingredients. You don't know what sugar is, what cream is, none of the things that are in that ice cream. It's nothing. You have no information. And so I'm putting it in my mouth, but you're not. You're just looking at me. And then you can ask me, how does it taste? And I could say what's the texture? So it's creamy, it's cold, it's this, a million. I could describe it in the most amazing way. But if you don't put it in your mouth and you just hear my description, now you're going to have to believe me. And so it becomes a belief. Now, when you can throw the belief away, because all belief is actually useless, think about that situation. What is the point of me having the direct experience and knowing exactly what that flavor is like, and then you don't? And you're like, oh, I'll just believe you. For no reason, I'll just believe you. It doesn't make sense. That's why all beliefs are useless. Now, what was the last part of it? I just lost my train of thought. Um, Well, I was just going to say, so if you finally grab the ice cream and you put it in your mouth, now there is no need for believing. Now you know, right? So I just wanted to give that little example. Do you remember what you were going to say?
Uh, no, I was just scanning the text again because a few things came up as you were reading it. Um, what happens along this spiritual path? Because I've noticed that it brings up things that were done to me, which I wasn't aware of at the time, and I wonder if maybe the same thing will eventually happen to those who hurt me and weren't conscious of it back then. I'm not sure if this is exactly what Elaine is getting at, but I think definitely, I'll just speak from my own experience. As I became less and less resistant to what was coming up, more of the things that I'd done, I would have to confront, as in like bad things, and uncomfortable feelings about the truth of these things, even if they weren't like, societally very bad things. To me, they were bad and things I would be ashamed of, I wouldn't want to admit to have had done. So I can see how that would be very karmic in its presentation, that now I have to confront this thing I did when I was 12. It's come up, and I'm in my 30s. Like this has a very karmic flavor to it. Um, so in a way, this is all in the mind though still. So as you go further into your suffering and you're more open to confronting what comes up, everything will come up. So in a way, you have to face everything that you've done, but there's not it's not sort of like this r real world thing. This is all again like in your mind, and you're processing everything that's happening in your mind. It's not something that's going to go with you to another life, but it very much has this flavor, of karma to it. Um, so the actual question was asking if maybe the same thing will eventually happen to those who hurt me, only if they begin their awakening journey and face their own suppressed emotions. But that being said, someone who acts in a very abusive way, as I said before, in real terms, will be dealing with much more significant real world consequences of their actions. But this isn't like a metaphysical, like unknowable thing. It's like if I go and burn someone's house down, that's a big action that the consequence will be I'll get arrested and go to jail. These things just have proportional weight. So that's what I'm referring to with that. Um, so I want to make it very clear that there is like a sort of yes to that, but not in the framing of like um, metaphysical karma.
Oh, I was going to say that I know that this is not the justice that we want, right? So if there's the abuser, we want justice. It's almost like deep down, our ego wants them to be abused, or actually in the mind, we want to abuse them back so that it's like level. But what I was gonna say, sorry, I just forgot again, but I'm just looking here. Why did I just forget? Oh yeah, okay, so oh yeah, I was gonna just talk about, so this is, even though this is not, you can't really prove it exactly just for fun. I mean, I can also do something just that's just interesting. So what it seems like is that from all of the accounts of near-death experience, and remember it's near, meaning nobody actually fully died. Isn't that funny? Like when oh, this is proof that there's an afterlife. It's like, but it's near death, meaning it wasn't to completion. But whatever. So they have like thousands of accounts, and everybody sort of seems to have the same story. And so my theory is that awakening, especially if it goes very deep, is sort of like a death of the mind or the contents of the mind, right? But I think that in those near-death experiences, when somebody would drown and then, or they're in surgery and then for 10 minutes they died or their heart stopped and then they found themselves, everybody says the same thing, right? Like in this place, and the love is like indescribable. And then there's the life review which is usually described as a screen where you watch your whole life and everything that you did. And some people say, I can feel. So let's say that I was someone that was in a room and I was being like really bad to a bunch of people. So there were like four women. I'm just making this up. This never happened. So like there's four women in the room and I'm just like yelling at them. Those people say that in that experience, the near-death experience, they felt what they were feeling in the moment, but they also felt what the other people that were hurt felt in the same moment. So I'm talking about this because she asks like, will the person, what does it say here? Um, both for those, no, well, basically, will the people that abused me also have to one day face what they've done, right? Completely, like when they can finally see it, just like an awakening. And my theory is that when you die, just like in the near-death experience, the mind begins to die. And you can kind of think of awakening as that happening without the trigger of physical death. So it just happens spontaneously. You're perfectly healthy, and then the mind starts to die. Not the actual mind. How would you describe it? Like, I guess again, the contents, the ego inside of the mind. Because you can think of the mind as this incredible computer, but inside the computer is the ego. So I guess it is that that begins to dissolve, even if you're not dying. But if you did die, so you're at the hospital, you're like 90 years old, and then suddenly flatline. My guess is that the process of the brain dying is a form of awakening. And then to add a kind of like science fiction twist to this is sort of if you think about it, there are infinite mysteries of this existence and the universe that science, slowly discovers. But if you think about the concept of time, some people say like, time doesn't exist and all these things. I'm talking about time because some people will say if you're dying on a bed, then your brain has time to die. And so this idea that you'd have an awakening, just to make it clear, what I'm basically saying is that once you're like, let's say you're on your deathbed and then you die, that the brain takes like 10 minutes to fully die. And in those 10 minutes, you could experience an awakening that would be experienced like you're like years of an awakening in that 10-minute period, like using that concept that there's no time. And then there was one person when I was talking about this that said, but what about somebody that dies in an explosion or they shoot themselves and then their brain is destroyed in 1 second? And I would just say in this theory, the same thing in a split second. It doesn't matter how long it is. You could divide a second into 1,000. And in that little sliver of a second, you could probably fit the entire awakening, right? So that's my theory. I think that that's interesting that all of us when we die, um, that is the justice, but funny enough, it's not like God punishing you. It's literally closure. So it's like you did this. So it's like every single scene is this is another interesting fact that the brain is able to record every single second of your life. And that is in the brain somehow. Every single second. And so that's why I think that awakening does happen at death. And so it's like, here's a moment when you did this to this person this needs closure. So this is a little death part of the mind and the brain fully, having closure. Oh, you have to feel this. Now you have to feel this. You're going to have to cry a million tears for what you did. Cry a million tears for yourself. And so I think that's just an interesting thing. Yeah, probably when you die, that happens. And then the only thing that I think is, but then why why would someone live their entire life unconscious and then at the very end awaken and then that's it, they can't even enjoy it, right? But I guess it doesn't matter because they're
Yeah,
dying.
another thing we can never know.
Yeah.
Um, yes. Just to add that Elena did say in another part of the question, uh, mm, do you think that this is in fact what karma is, the awakening of consciousness that brings unpleasant things to light, both for those who have done wrong and for those who have been victims? So the first part of that was kind of what I was saying, that in the awakening of consciousness, the awakening of consciousness that brings unpleasant things to light, that's definitely true. That's exactly what it does. By awakening more and more unpleasant things will come. Um, so yeah, the my response earlier was kind of embedded in your question as well. Um,
And I would just say that this is a mystery as to why some people begin to awaken and some people never do. Because if you think about it using the word karma, um, to awaken is, even though it's like torture, right? Most of the time it's like torture. The awakening is literally a liberation. So that's literally what it is. So it's like if you were someone that was an abuser and you did a lot of that, and now suddenly you're awakening and you're having images and you're realizing the depth, and then it just goes deeper and deeper. Oh, I was this. Oh, I did this, and then it gets worse and worse, all the guilt and so even though that's going to be like torture for that person that was an abuser, the fact that, like, using Elena's words, it's coming to light, right? Was the brings unpleasant things to light. For that abuser to face all of that feels almost like a punishment, but in reality, that person is carrying all of that suffering every second of their life. It's destroying their life. They're just completely, they're always something bothering them. They're always depressed or feeling something. And so I think that's interesting that even though it's like torture, it literally happens. It's a mysterious thing, almost saying now it's time for you to let all of this go. And the more you release, the better the rest of your life here on earth will be, right? So it's just like it's mysterious.
yeah, and it's funny that really the ego wants this justice to happen, but the justice it wants is punishment, and the greatest punishment this person could ever have is to not awaken because it's torture every
Yeah.
second. It's an unconscious torture, and what the ego wants is for this person to realize that that would lead them to liberation and freedom, which would be the opposite of what the ego wants. Yeah.
Let me see. I think, oh, there was reincarnation in past lives, which is very interesting. So, past lives, so why does that happen in the mind? So, either when somebody does, hypnosis and then they see their other lives, or for me, I've never done hypnosis, but I had that happen in my mind, right, before I realized these other things. So, the reason that the experience of past lives happens in the mind is always as a function of awakening. So if awakening is really about dealing with all this stuff that's very uncomfortable, um, it's almost like a mechanism that the mind uses when you discover something in your psyche that is so horrible to the ego that it's too close to you. So something that you could have never imagined. You thought you were a good person and this and that, and suddenly you find something monstrous. While the past lives idea and experience is so that, let's say I'm that, I'm going to share an example. Um, yeah, I'll just give that example. So this was a good while ago when I still believed in a soul and all these things. I was still extremely suppressed. And so one day I started to realize this really deep issue that I have with women. It was both a hatred of women. I mean, objectifying is hatred, but it was like a hatred of women and also the depth of how I've always sexually objectified women since puberty, right? Since 14, but it was completely suppressed and unconscious. And so when I began to see the depth of that, right? Like if I see a woman somewhere, my mind immediately goes to that. It's almost like, oh, she's just an object for me to use, right? That sort of thing. When I started to see that, but I was still very much identified with my ego. And so there was probably a little bit of like, I'm a good person, right? Still in my mind. Once I started to see that, then immediately what I started to think was, oh, I'm getting downloads. And what's actually happening is that this download is telling me that in a past life, I was a rapist, or I was, something like that, or I abused women. And so, and then there's other layers to this, which, adds to the sort of illusion of past lives, which is, for me, I've never had a romantic relationship, I've never had sex. And so it was sort of like, oh, I'm being punished. Or if not punished, then this is why this is happening to me because I did that to women, or maybe I had too much sex, something like that. And in this life, I'm not having, the same. And so all of that, I just want to go back to because it was so difficult to realize this, my ego was like, my God, like why is this living inside of my mind? The mind creates the mechanism of thinking it's a past life, and also it can project in the mind details, right? The mind can create absolutely anything, like, oh, in the past life I was this rapist that was like in, maybe in London, who knows, or in Paris, and I did this and this and that, and it's literally the mind just creating more and more illusions. But the reason that it does that is because if I just realized that there's all of this stuff in my psyche and it's just mine, it's too difficult at that stage. And so the mind creates a little bit of a separation and says, oh, that was me, but it was a past life. And immediately when you say past life, there's this giant separation. So you see, even in that example of it's my past life, think about if there is a separation, then are you really saying that that was you? Because it's a past, it makes it easier to process something difficult. So if it makes it easier, there's something happening there where it's like you don't really deep down believe that it was you, because this is you right now. You can't fully and completely believe that you were something else in another time. And so I just wanted to make that clear that past lives functions as a way to make what's the expression? Coming to terms with what you're seeing, it makes that easier. And eventually, if you just keep going, you'll just know that everything in your psyche is from this life, that there is no other life. And the last thing that I want to say before we did the Q&A, um, the thing that I said was, um, and I just lost it, but I'll remember. Um, Past lives. Man, it just like smoke. Let's see if I can look at this. Maybe I'll remember. Um, Reincarnation. Do you remember the last thing that I said, or
You were talking about the separation.
yeah, it was something to do with that.
Yeah.
Separation. Oh, okay. Okay, now I remember. So the reason that people believe in that stuff is because there is a gigantic misunderstanding about the psyche. So when someone believes in past lives and they're all into that, they don't really have an understanding of just how much every child that is raised on the planet, how psychologically damaged they are. Even parents, which are rare, parents that are like just better parents, even those parents will still cause a huge amount of damage because of how the ego works, right? Even good parents will have an ego, and things will happen as the child gets older. The child always becomes a reflection of the parents, and the parents want the child to basically make them, proud and all these things. So, um, that's the reason. I'm forgetting it again, but yeah. So once you understand, just to give one example, the silent treatment. So imagine that a parent told the child to not do something, the child did it anyway. And now, as punishment, the parent basically ignores them. The child is like, "Oh, hey, mom, can I do this?" They're silent. They're ignoring. They don't even want to look at them. Just this alone is so unbelievably damaging. And so most people would think, but why is it so damaging? Because a child's brain is developing. And so it's almost like saying um, that a brain that is like being developed, it's going to take years and years for it to fully form. And you're giving it a task that it should never have, which is to just be by itself, right? It needs the child needs attention, needs love, needs acceptance. And so just one little thing, which I think a lot of parents do, silent treatment. This is one abuse. There are like so many. That's why it's thousands and thousands of times. And so once you understand that, then when you encounter something in your mind, you can't say, oh, this is from a past life. No, this is from this life, because the damage is so deep sometimes that, for example, for me, the stuff that I've seen, the unbelievable violence, almost like, we've said like not a Nazi, that just all these things. Again, a Nazi is a good example, right? I've always had this thing with interest with Nazis in World War II. In back then I could have said, "Oh, I was probably a Nazi." That's why I've got this in my psyche. right? If I can kind of embody this part of me that feels no empathy and could just be cruel and just shoot someone and feel nothing, then in that sort of thinking, it would say, "Oh, I was a Nazi. In my other life, I was a Nazi in World War II." No, it's just the amount of damage that can be done from birth or even before birth, but through all of those years in childhood is to such an extent that the psyche tries its best. But it's basically if you take something like anger, which should just be very natural, once you start suppressing it, it's almost like concentrating and becoming more sick or more rotten or putrid. And the more you suppress it, it's worse and worse and worse until you get this, basically. So the character in my mind that isn't a Nazi and would just feel nothing, that's basically it. And then most people think, but where did that come from? Like your life wasn't that bad, right? And then what does that mean, not that bad? Like, do I need to be beaten and burned every day for it to be that bad? No, psychological damage happens all the time in childhood. So I think that makes more sense. Once you know that, you don't need to believe in past lives. It's just this life. That's the depth of the damage. Was there anything else? Because there's a reincarnation, it's the same thing, but I don't know if that is so difficult to describe how the thing that you think you are doesn't exist, and therefore what could reincarnate, right? That idea I find a little bit difficult to really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I suppose the words could be helpful. Um,
Oh, I think I got an analogy. So the best analogy would be complete and total amnesia, where you don't know anything about your life, you don't know your name, so nothing, zero. It's kind of a good image for enlightenment if you think, even though you don't lose your memory in enlightenment, but because if think about it, everybody that's watching, you have an entire world of details. I was born here, this is my name, this is my mom, dad, blah blah blah. What if you just didn't remember any of it? You're just here. So even that image kind of brings being in the now, even though it's kind of odd because if right now I don't remember anything, I'd just be kind of like here looking like thinking, where am I? Like, what is this? So there's an emptiness about that. But what I was going to say is, if amnesia is equivalent to enlightenment, where like this, all of the emotions that you suppressed are gone, and therefore all of the connections in the mind with all of the suppressed memories that are full of pain, if it's all gone with this amnesia and you're just here, right? What is here right now? If I have amnesia right now, I don't even know what I'm doing right now. There's just the five senses, right? So if I'm empty of all of that, the personalities, the memories, and I die right now, what would reincarnate? Nothing. There's no mem so it's the same thing, but we take the contents of our mind so seriously and we think that's who we are, all of these emotions and memories and thoughts and beliefs, that we think that this bundle of things in the mind is what's going to survive death and then go into another body. And that's crazy. Now, the last thing I want to say about this is that if you think about it, you could say it's a weird way to say it that every child that's born, every baby that's born, has the pure awareness of the five senses. And so you could say that awareness, this thing that, like how do we even, like how does it even exist, is being born into bodies. It's not even accurate, but it's, oh, here's a new body and it's got awareness. That's basically it. It's not like you have something that's yours that is going to remain and then go into another body, right? A new body will create a new ego and a new collection of memories, which remember the example that I gave, which is a theory that it gets destroyed at death because you have to awaken. Then yeah, it's like that's destroyed. So that's another good point. If this is true, which I think it is, that at death you have to process everything that you didn't process to completion. Once it's completed, you cried all the tears, all the fear, and all the anger. What would there be left to reincarnate? Nothing. So I think that makes it clear.
yeah, and to tack on to the even when in that example everything's gone, people then sort of default to the soul, which is like some unknowable thing that lies outside of our awareness currently that we either we rejoin into or become again after the death of whatever this is. There's some eternal quality that we access again. That is really what we are. This is uh, a manifestation of it, or something like this, higher self, all of these things. But again, if that's where your mind goes, I would encourage you to then think, how does that idea serve your ego? It serves it by giving you another way to not look at the devastation of the reality of the finality of death and all of the suppressed emotions that are attached to that. That what does thinking that, believing that, or entertaining thoughts about that do to serve the ego's purpose of distracting you from looking at all of the things attached to the truth of the finality of death? What comes up if you then explore the totality of death, the absolute totality of it? Does it immediately make you feel uncomfortable? Then there you might have your answer that there's lots to explore. Um, because as soon as you start speaking about these things, it's like, how could you know? How could you not know? It doesn't really matter. It's like, what does doing this right here, right now do to serve the ego? And then in your experience, um, you will know the ego more intimately, and there'll be no doubt in your mind, in your experience, about what these things are for. And then when in a enlightened state, in a natural state, void of an ego, these thoughts are impossible. There's nothing to refer to. There's no one to refer to. There's no self for these things to refer to. That's, I think, ungraspable, and if
Yeah.
you're very much engaged with these things. Um, but yeah, so again, at the beginning of the question, just link it back at the end to always ask, what does entertaining these things do to serve the ego's purpose? And then you'll probably be led to some discomfort, and that's where to go.
Yeah, and I was gonna say about so you're talking about the soul. Um, just to very briefly, I'm not going to talk about that again because I've said it so many times, but the entire journey. So when it begins when you're a very, very little kid and then you just basically fall. I think that's kind of also the fall of Adam and Eve. Probably it's the same thing. So it's like you're a completely enlightened child and you fall all the way to complete unconsciousness, right? So you can also this image that is a tunnel that I've created here from enlightenment all the way to the first level of dreaming. So see it as a tunnel, right? What this hand represents as enlightenment, let's say, is your physical eyes. When you're a child, like 1 year old, you are one with your vision. You're one with the senses, and there's nothing else. There's no inner world. And then as you fall back, you are basically distancing yourself from reality, which is the five senses. And the more that you do this, so when you're here at the first level, let's compare when you're a child. That's why when people think that children, especially very small children, they have that gleam in their eyes, right? That's actually not just because they're, oh, children don't know any better, right? That's basically the idea that adults are the ones that like are superior. And then you see a little 1 year old just smiling at everyone, and you think, oh, they're smiling because they're still a kid, meaning they should know more stuff, and then they're going to stop smiling. But in reality, this experience, even though the child wouldn't know it, is like all the words that you can imagine, like magical or extraordinary. And just because they're one with the five senses. So every departure, as we went further and further away, which is also an illusion, by the way, because your eyes have never changed, right? But the illusion of the ego. As so from here to this, here you can't enjoy the senses. And this is why everybody is bored so quickly, right? Somebody is like in a beautiful city and they're looking at their phone. It's just too boring. It's like, oh, I've seen the Eiffel Tower for 2 seconds. I don't need to see it again because your vision is the experience of your vision is literally boring, right? And why am I talking about this? Because I just want to remember going back to the soul that people in the spiritual community, when they're talking about all these things and they believe in a soul, this is something that I know, right? I can't say there is no soul because even that's a belief. That once I was ready and I read the words that basically said a soul has never existed. Like that's just an idea that somebody created. And I went into psychosis and all that. But what happened after is a gigantic amount of grief that I could not have accessed. It would have stayed in my brain, ruining my life, basically. What is ruining your life? The numbing the senses. So you don't even know that your life is ruined, basically. That's what unconsciousness is. You think that you're having a great life, when in reality, the child experience versus the most adults is like heaven and hell. And hell, I wrote this once, the most, it's an analogy, like there's the devil in hell, which is just being completely unconscious. Hell doesn't look like fire and devils. Hell is you're suffering and you don't know it. You don't know that you're in hell. That is literally unconsciousness. So this is when people are absolutely miserable and they will look at you and say, "I'm very happy." And it's like, no, this is happy. A child, right? A child, a 1-year-old child, that's happy. Um, but one final thing, I just went off on a tangent as well, about the soul. That once, so the immense grief that came up, that grief could not come up as long as my ego was very comforted with the idea that I've got a soul, my parents have a soul, my grandma, everybody that I love. And so all of that is taken care of. I don't have to ever worry about it. I don't have to feel fear. I don't have to cry because you know what? When I die, nothing changes. I still have the five senses somehow as a spirit, and then I'm gonna live forever with my family, right? Once that's blown to bits, and all you have is the finality of death, then you're going to be able to access a world of grief. I think it's the worst grief, the deepest grief. And so I'm saying all that because the people that say, oh no, there is a soul and I've experienced this and this and that, they have not cried those tears because they're comforted. They're comforted by all of this information. And therefore, in that tunnel that I said, this is, enlightenment, they're still very far away from the senses. And so just to show you that the more that you have the experience of clinging to the ego and believing in all these things, you are separated from life, which is right here, and from experiencing it in a magical way. Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah. Okay, should I go to the third one?
Yeah, I think we're ready for the
Okay.
third.
Okay, this is from Mpande again. So subtle seeing. From the live call about the ego, Steve's first explanation, isn't it weird in a sense? You do actually watch all these thoughts, identities, voices, emotions arise and fade within you. And there's always this subtle, instantaneous reminder that's like saying, I see all these arising and fading and wanting myself to identify with them, not in the way that you want to remind yourself that you're the observer, but it's like you literally just have this instant reminder subtly that like you're watching, and even if you try to identify, it'll fade again either way. So now I do indeed actually feel like deliberately identifying with whatever comes up, although knowing, feeling that subtle view of it's all just going to rise and fade, don't bother. But now I have a sense of wanting to identify with the ego to enjoy the experience. This is a really great question because it's got a lot of like subtle things.
Mm.
Um, Maybe I'll start at the bottom. Oh, the first thing I want to clarify is just to make it more clear for people. I think that what he means is, so in the beginning where he says, um, you watch the everything, right? The content of the ego. So the thoughts, identities, voices, emotions arise and fade. And then he's talking about awareness, which is the thing that watches these things, right? It's completely separate from them. And so he's basically describing awareness. That's why it could be a little bit confusing, which is the description of what awareness is doing is I see all these things arising and fading, and then wanting to identify with them. And then let me just see. Okay, the part, yeah. So I guess it would be more useful. So from what he described, I think awareness is there. it's abiding, which means always there. I'm not sure if it is, but let's say that it is. It's always there watching, right? And so as it's watching here in the mind, here's the content of the ego. Oh, that person just said that to me, very angry. Oh, that stupid person, whatever it is. These things are arising and falling, arising and falling. And so the last part, which I think is the most important, he said that although he has noticed that everything comes and goes, that there is a wanting to identify with the ego to enjoy the experience. So what this literally means is that once awareness has become permanent, it's always there. Yes, the ego is actually going to show itself to you more than ever. And what's funny about this is that most people think that abiding awareness or self-realization is the end of the path, or it's enlightenment. And it's like it's so far from that because there's so much ego and so much pain even at that point. And so what he's describing is basically the experience of self-realization or having a permanent awareness. And so what you said about wanting to enjoy the experience, that's actually exactly what you're supposed to do. Because every time there's a trigger, um, I want to add something because I spoke to him before. It's about this, where he's basically saying like if he's watching from awareness, and so there was a reluctance he was describing in almost giving attention to the ego, giving attention to the activity. And this is what I want to talk about because if your awareness is permanent, you don't have to worry about it. There's almost like a, oh, I should only watch, right? And maybe it takes a little bit of courage because the ego's like, I prefer being here. It's painless. But the courage is whatever ego arises, actually, you should give it your undivided attention. You should actually allow yourself to become that part of the ego as long as it's not hurting other people, it's not doing something dangerous, right, physically. As long as it's just in your mind. So I'll give you an example. Let's say right now, I mean, I'm doing this live, but let's say that nobody can see me and I'm just kind of feeling nothing right now. And then suddenly I get a trigger, right? I read something. It could be, I haven't made a video in a long time, but let's say there's a negative comment. And let's say that I don't like it. I could just look at my phone and say, what a moron, right? He'll never get to my level, whatever the ego wants to say. So right there is the example. The awareness in my mind is watching that, right? I am not identified with it. I don't believe the words. It's just some pain that I have coming up. And so my awareness, I don't have to worry about it. It's there always. But when this arises, this disgust at the person, this deep arrogance that I have, I become that part of the ego, even if it's for a second. I could even make a face like, he'll never, something like looking down at the person like that. And then I'm just back to me, the normal me that doesn't believe any of that. So I think that makes it clear that when you get to this level of experience, the best thing that you can do is give your full and undivided attention to everything that arises. But I'm thinking now of thoughts. I mean, thoughts. Yeah, I mean, you can just let them happen, but I think it's more important to just talk about the triggers. Allow yourself to become that. Um, and actually, it goes deeper and deeper, meaning that maybe once awareness is there, there could be a tiny clinging to, like, I'm going to be spiritual or I'm going to be, something like that. And this is when you allow the ego to arise. It's almost like, I don't care about being spiritual. I want to fully look at and embody whatever pain arises.
Yeah, and it's really what the awareness is for. I think
Yeah.
that like when awareness is found and when it begins to be established, I think it's an egoic preference to identify with the awareness because it even on this very subtle level, the ego can see that like the neutral awareness is more spiritual than the
And pain-free, by the way.
and pain-free, yeah. So to rest in awareness is almost an egoic endeavor in itself because it's preferable to actually like, looking at what's there. But it's become more evident in recent discussions that the purpose of the awareness is there literally to be space for all of the ego to go through what it needs to do. Um, so it's actually really, really good that you're at the point where you're seeing that there's a willing and wanting to engage with what's coming up, because only by doing that can you see what's there fully. And now you're open to this degree. you'll become more and more open. You'll see more and more of what's going there because presumably it's impersonal for you at this point. There's no or little identification with these things that come up. That gives you the scope to explore what's there to its depths. And to speak on the thoughts thing, I think thoughts can be a really good I almost see it as like a river with like fish in it, and like a particularly interesting fish, like a thought, is the beginning of exploring a part of the ego. So you could realize like, oh, um, because thoughts are very quick and subtle, but now there's this greater capacity for awareness, more thoughts can be seen, and therefore you'll see ones that you didn't see before, which are indicators or like starting points for more hidden parts of your ego. So it could be like a more cutting, um, like insult to someone, or like a negative thought about someone that you never had negative thoughts about. Um, it's always going to be negative, by the way, like negative. Like that's what this part of the journey gives you access to is the depth of your um negative parts. It's not really negative, but I'll use that word. Um, so being having this awareness for your thoughts is a great way to start accessing new, or they're not actually new, but like new to your awareness. You're seeing more of what's there. Um, and I guess it will become obvious to you, but it's also counterintuitive to the ego that the more you start exploring, of course, there'll be more resistance. And Steve and I use this analogy of like you'll hit like a barrier. You might start exploring and something feels uncomfortable or not like you or not familiar to what you think you were all this time. And that might send you going the other way because of there's some fear, but that's the stuff that you'll have access to more now, and that's the way to go. You'll start seeing surprising things and things that you resist, and now you're in this position where you're able to go very deep with it.
Yeah, and this question, maybe I'll just say it again, is what he's describing as having the awareness and then wanting to enjoy the ego is what we've described as when you have a trigger and then you go somewhere private where nobody can see you to feel that stuff. So usually anger, that's what we mean. So it's like when you navigate or you manage your life in such a way that when you're triggered, you fully go into the emotion. The analogy that I've given many times is that you on the spiritual path, it's almost like you're becoming a really good actor, but it's not just pretending because once you have, let's say, there's a really deep trigger of sadness or grief, or you have that. I think in the first question he said, like maybe the people in my life are going to die or something to do with death, and I'm sobbing. So this is the same thing. It's like you could be fine. You're kind of more in awareness, and then the trigger comes. You could go in the bathroom. You could go somewhere. You're sobbing there for like 5 or 10 seconds, like the whole world is ending, right? This is what it means to go fully into the pain. It doesn't really make sense because you're going to be watching it from awareness, even as you're sobbing. It's almost like there's something above you, even though it's not above you, but it's almost like here and you're just sobbing. And then once you're done, the character is gone, right? So that's what I mean by every time. For those few seconds, you became a character. You're an actor, but without a trigger, you're an actor that doesn't have a role. They're on the day off, they're day off, right? They're not acting. There's no cameras. But the moment that there's a trigger, you become the actor that's now in the studio. And it's like, oh, there's like a lot of sadness. I can easily sob. And then imagine, the camera person saying, or the director saying, action. And now if you feel into it, you're just going to sob and sob and sob. And when you feel that it's gone, then it's like the scene's like end scene, and then it's done. And that's how you do it every time.
Yeah, and a important word that you used in your question was this like enjoyment. And now because it will be impersonal, you're not believing any of this, it's enjoyable because the consequences you see that there are none. It's all mental. So there's this enjoyment aspect of it where even though you're seeing like very dark things, you don't believe it belongs to anyone anymore, and you can really like explore it and see what's there. So although there will of course be like all the discomfort, fear, crying, all of these things, there's very much an enjoyment aspect to this part which was not present in the part that came before it. Um, so that's a very important distinction, I think, between what leads up to self-realization and what comes after.
Yeah. And it's we talked about how it is egoic to only want to rest in awareness. And this is something that's very, very common um, in the world of spirituality, because what happens is if you really concentrate and you practice concentration on awareness, this is like the most sophisticated form of suppression, which is you just keep pointing your focus, your attention to awareness. And then if you just keep concentrating, all pain stops in that moment. It doesn't mean that your mind is not filled with, worlds of pain. But if you keep concentrating, it's almost like you're prolonging. Or another way to think about it is if you're in meditation for a long time and you're just very peaceful, when people focus on awareness to escape the pain, and they also say something which is a lie, which is the self doesn't exist, which is the ego, which it does not. But then they say, therefore, the emotional pain does not exist. And that's why I'm focusing on awareness. And that's BS. It's actually to not feel uncomfortable. Um, but yeah, what I was going to say is if imagine that you're in meditation, I'm describing what these people are doing, where they just keep concentrating, sometimes, all day, every day. It's like never wanting to leave the meditation, basically. So it's like instead of you getting up, even if you did a 3 hour meditation, you have to get up and live your life. You can't just keep meditating, right? But what they're trying to do is stay in the meditation and not deal with any of the emotions. Yeah, and I think long term it never works, and something really scary will happen, which is there will be like a tsunami of pain, and then they're going to try to concentrate on awareness, but now the tsunami is too strong.
Yeah. And even this meditation, they're not really meditating, they're just concentrating. They're not allowing anything to come up.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
and it all gets very confusing because, as Steve said, people can do these things for their entire life and they can even do it and not face the tsunami, because they're it's very sophisticated. The ego is so sophisticated and finds so many ways at every single point to rest, to not face what's there. Um, so I don't know why it's luck or not that you can either see through it, you have the capacity to move past these points. Um, but a good indication that something you're ready to look at something is where there's some panic and some fear when you hear truth, and there's something in your body, I think, that knows what you've just heard is true and you don't want to look at it. That tends to be a great indicator that there's something painful to me to look at now or soon, or like it's knocking on the door. And I think sometimes people have the option to not look at it. It's not my experience, but I think some people are like, no, 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 not going to do that. Going to keep doing my meditation and be spiritual and be calm and rest in awareness, and that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But that's a trap. Very, very appealing trap, but it's a trap nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think that if you said some people can do that their entire lives, and then what that sounds like is that, oh, the person is just in peace all the time. But, like you said, our mind is so sophisticated that you can have an experience both of peace, and then if you could somehow look into that person's experience, they're also not at peace at all. But it's one huge illusion. It's like here's all this pain, and then there's something covering it. But it's sort of like that image of, I think you said, of like a horse. The horse is like a giant animal, and then you put like a cloth over it, but you can see like there's something big under it. And then the cloth, yeah, you can't see the horse, but it's there. So I think it's the same thing. And I was going to say, even if someone meditated for decades and they seem to be peaceful, but in this way, where they don't want to feel anything, you'll very quickly see, if you have eyes to see, that the person will probably not be someone that's like genuinely kind, compassionate. And there's these phrases in my mind, like people that say, like, "Oh, you still have anger?" Like that's sort of like gaslighting, because they think that they eliminated their anger by doing something like that, by ignoring it and those sorts of things. And also sadly, like probably teachers who are probably mostly not doing it on purpose, but they also think they have attained a very high level. And yet the high level has nothing to do with the hard stuff, and it's just escaping. And then again, you'll have what people call abusive gurus that are they're just people that have a lot of pain, and they're not wanting to see it, and unfortunately they're hurting people. But that's what the world is, right?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, a good litmus test if you have a guru or someone who is presenting themselves as very deeply realized spiritual is to ask them if they've found the depths of what's inside them. Like, have you found the worst of the worst that exists in the world inside of you? And that's a good indicator. I mean, I'm not sure that's ever a situation that many people are going to be in. But I think if you're on this path, you sort of get a good gauge, even if you can't really put it into words, when someone is or just willing to discuss the very unglamorous parts of this journey, of which it all is rather unglamorous. So I think if the focus is on peace as a thing to attain, that's a pretty good sign that someone's very suppressed.
Yeah. And it's incredible that, oh, I think this is kind of a funny way to describe the difference between someone, let's say a teacher that's saying that they think they're enlightened, but it's just all from suppression, is that maybe their mind, I don't know if it's possible, but their mind is quiet, but because they're filled with tears and anger and fear, they will not experience the five senses blissfully. And so that's kind of funny. It's sort of like a copy, a very cheap copy of going towards enlightenment, but it's not. And that's I don't know if you could tell, you can't tell, but that's basically it. That the more that you release, the more that the five senses become incredible. And that's what the entire path is about, so that you can enjoy being here in this short lifespan, right? So that you can enjoy it. You can be walking in a park, watching a sunset, and it's like the most incredible thing for no reason. That's the point of the path, not to be peaceful in this kind of fake way. Because as long as there's all those tears and all that stuff, like the tunnel that I said, it's like my eyes are here, and then this illusion in my mind is like distancing itself from, and every step backwards, which is going deeper into the unconsciousness, the more that my vision is not experienced in this wonderful way. Is there anything else? Let's see. I think maybe not, right?
Yeah, no, I think we covered it quite comprehensively. Yeah, so that's the final question. So thank you everyone who submitted your questions this week.
Thank you.
Um, as always, we'll be doing the live on Monday and the next Q&A a week from now. So please submit your questions in the Ask a Question category, and we will uh, announce what the sort of starting theme for the next live will be later in the week. Excuse me. And yeah, so we'll see you all then. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.